Welcome back to another episode of the Pioneer Mind podcast. We have a returning guest today, Steve Stengel from Encore Energy. And the last time we got together, we were talking off camera that we would get together and talk about prices and where things are going to go with these upcoming catalysts or conflicts. And, as many of you are aware, there's a war going on in Iran, and it's disrupting the Straits of Hormuz, supplies to China and Russia through Venezuela, Iran, all kinds of disruptions going on in this industry. And we thought we'd come back and talk more about that. I'm sharing from my point of perspective is a lot of times, even in the news today, I've heard people talking about this is an overreaction on the oil prices, that somehow the industry's taking advantage of things. And and Steve might disagree with that. He really kind of give his point of view too, but mine is that the industry is very sensitive to things. It's very smart. It knows what it's doing, and I believe that it's more fragile than we think in terms of supply and demand and movement, logistics, all these things are. There's a million variables going on to get this oil and gas into the market for consumers to use. And I think the market's very, very smart. So when you see this reaction, they're not just trying to take advantage. They know stuff that, like, I'll never know. And Steve probably maybe completely understands it in some ways. But in my view, these reactions are justified and probably uh, a pretty smart move by the industry. So, Steve, you and I were talking just a few minutes ago, but like, when the news talks about pricing and has these perspectives on where price is going to go and that it's going to come back down, it's going to react. This is just a 4-day war. We'll be done. All the stuff you're hearing about how fast this is going to go. I don't tend to believe that. I believe any disruption in the market, say you even disrupted things for just a few weeks, it would take months to recover. I think, it's not going to happen overnight, these recoveries that they want. So when you hear in the news that this is just transitory. Remember, inflation was transitory.
Right.
You remember that.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah, we all remember that line. That'll go down in history. So when you hear that in the news, what's your response?
Well, I first want to say that I fully support President Trump and what he's doing in Iran. And it is a window of opportunity that will not present itself again. And I do believe that we will be successful. And I believe there will be brighter days for the Iranian people. I also believe that what he's doing now, we're seeing this spike in oil prices, but I believe that it'll further stabilize the region for years to come and mitigate a lot of the risk we have right now as it relates to geopolitical risk coming out of the Middle East, right? So,
Right.
with that being said, a lot of people, a lot of investors, and even traders are saying, this is a spike and it'll come down and it'll go back to the levels that, the previous levels of $55 to $60 a barrel. And I don't believe that. I believe that we will see a spike, we will see it come down, and I believe that it will stay at a higher level because of factors well beyond what's going on in the Middle East or in Venezuela or any other geopolitical risk. I believe that what the majority of people that are not actually in the oil and gas industry believe is that we have an oversupply of crude oil.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, 30 minutes ago, I was watching Larry Kudlow on Fox News, and he just said it over and over again. We've got this overflow. We've got this, what people call glut. I don't know where that came from or what it really means, but, the reality is that we are producing 106 million barrels of oil per day across the globe, and we are using 105 million barrels of oil across the globe. Okay.
Yeah.
And yes, that creates maybe temporary storage problems at the surface, which makes us feel like, oh, we've got all these oil inventories and really brings, the price down. But the reality is oil is not sitting around in tanks waiting to be sold. It goes directly from the market, from the wellhead, okay, to the tanks, to the truck or pipeline, and to the market immediately. So our actual production from all of our wells across the world is what we're seeing every day at 106 million barrels of oil per day.
So if Iran, they're not shipping. They can't be shipping, can they?
I mean, they could be. Okay, they represent about 1.5 to 2 million barrels of oil per day. I would assume right now that has slowed down a lot, if not completely. Okay,
So
but that in itself would
go
not
ahead.
cause the spike that we're seeing. What's causing the spike that we're seeing is the fact that the Strait of Hormuz is 20 miles wide and 20,000 barrels of oil via tankers, cargo ships go through that channel every day. That's nearly 20% of the world's oil supply. Okay.
Yep.
That's the risk factor. All right. And like I say, I believe the risk there becomes less in future years because of what Trump is doing right now. All right. With that being said, prior to COVID, there were 153 rigs operating in Iran, and these are big rigs drilling deep for bigger reserves and bigger production. And 15 of those rigs are active right now offshore. Now, again, I don't know what they're doing today because of the current state of war that the country
Right.
is in, but prior to the war, there were 15 rigs operating in offshore waters on Iran for Iran. Okay. If you recall uh, in our last podcast, I'd mentioned that in 2014, there were 3,800 rigs operating across the globe. And today there are approximately 1,500.
Wow.
Okay. Maybe
Yep.
closer to 1,800, but somewhere in that range. And in 2014, there were 1,800 rigs operating right here in the United States. All right. Now, a lot of those were vertical wells, and a good portion of those were horizontal wells. Today, there are around 500.
Wow.
And that's primarily in the Permian Basin. And the Permian Basin has become 50% of the U.S. oil production. All right. Now, across the world, we've seen major declines in drilling. We've seen major declines in drilling over the last 10 to 12 years in the United States. And at the same time, we have seen wells going into production that were deeper with more reserves than your typical well. But those wells are fracked wells. They are Permian Basin wells. They are deep horizontals that produce a lot of oil, but they make a huge flush production in the first year and they start to tail off in the second and third years pretty
Gotcha.
significantly.
Right.
So the EIA has already reported that since COVID in 2026, we're going to see our first decline in U.S. oil production. And
Oh
that's
wow.
because, what's that?
I said, oh wow. I didn't
Yeah.
know.
And yeah, and the reason is because again, we are losing the flush producers that provide that big replacement of reserves that we consume every day. Okay. And so to give you a few numbers here, I'm going to go back to other things that are being said on the news, and I'm going to pivot for just a moment to Venezuela. Okay. Venezuela has around 1 million barrels of oil per day production, and Trump's policies have now converted that flow of oil to the United States, where we are going to be able to process their heavy oil at various refineries equipped for that oil in Texas. All right. And that's good news. The other good news is that, you're basically taking 400,000 barrels away from China. Okay. And
Right.
just like with Iran, there's a large portion of that 1.5 to 2 million barrels of oil per day that goes to China. So that'll come off the market for China as well. And so, you know, Trump's foreign policies have continued to make progress in areas that I don't think a lot of people think about. Okay. But in Venezuela, it ranks higher than Saudi Arabia, higher than Iran, higher than the United States. As a matter of fact, it ranks higher than any other country in the world for
Yep.
proven 303 billion. Okay. Now you have to ask the question, why does a country that has 303 billion barrels of oil reserve only make a million barrels a day? Okay. And most people are going to say because of conflict, danger,
Right.
and
Politics,
political
Maduro.
instability. Yes, all of those things play a role, but at the end of the day, the oil in Venezuela is two classifications, heavy and extra heavy. Okay. And the majority of that 303 billion barrels of oil is comes from what's called the Orinoco Belt region of Venezuela. And the Orinoco Belt region is classified as extra heavy oil. Even lower, 28-degree gravity is heavy oil, all right? Very heavy oil. And that's the average gravity for oil in Venezuela. In the United States, our oil, conventional, good old US crude oil, typically ranges around 35 to 40 degrees, which gravity, which is a thinness or thickness that is preferable for US refineries that make diesel and gasoline. All right. And the shale boom brought about major increases in oil production in the United States, and all of that oil is light oil. It's closer to 50 degree gravity. And so basically, those wells produce very well in the first year because they're multi stage fracking for miles underground. And they respond back very quickly because they are fracked and they are light oil. So you get a real big flush out of those wells. All right.
Right.
And again, the flush is going down, and it's going down because oil and gas companies, regardless of what anybody tells you, we drill our best prospect first. We drill our second best prospect second, and we drill our third best. We never put things over here for a rainy day. Okay.
Right.
It's not how it works. And that's the same across the world oil and gas industry. And so in the Permian Basin, they're drilling deeper and deeper with longer laterals, bigger multi stage fracks, and a whole lot more money is spent in deeper and tighter. Now, that's the key word, tighter rock. Rock that's not as preferable as the rock they drilled last year. They're going
Right.
deeper now into secondary layers. You could call them, instead of tier one prospects, you could call them tier two. There's a lot of oil there, but it's in tighter rock, which means you're not going to get as much out of the ground per linear foot of drainage in a horizontal well bore lateral. Okay. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
So it's costing US companies and companies across the world to drill deeper and tighter rock. And for example, in the Mid East, they have beautiful reservoirs over there. You've heard me say that before, but they
Yeah.
themselves are having to drill deeper into less favorable rock that they were drilling 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, because they drill their best prospects first
First.
and their
Yep.
worst prospects later. And so going back to this glut or this overflow of oil that we're swimming in, okay, you have to remember that oil is only reported on at surface. You don't hear a lot about what's going on in the reservoir. Oil is produced in solid rock, and some rock is more permeable and has more porosity and more oil saturation and better pressure than other rock.
Right.
And some rock moves oil fast, and some rock moves oil slow. In Venezuela, you've got 28-degree gravity oil or less. and it
Yeah,
just doesn't want to go ahead.
if someone saw a video of that material, of that oil, they wouldn't believe it. Am I right?
Right. It's like tar.
It
Okay.
just doesn't even look like that's oil.
Yeah.
They would make fun of you.
And when I start talking about this subject with people, most of the time they say, well, hey, you can use that thick oil, just like you can thin oil. And they are right. It's harder to transport, it's a little harder to process, but you can still use it. That's not the problem. The problem is it doesn't want to move through the rock to the wellbore very quickly. Then, when it gets in the wellbore, it has increased by what we call hydrostatic pressure.
Right.
You've got the formation pressure and the reservoir pressure trying to push hydrocarbons from deep underground to the surface. When you add heavy oil to that mixture that already moves slowly through the rock, when it gets into the wellbore, it creates another bottleneck. It's heavy. It doesn't want to, there's a thing called gravity, and it does
Right.
not want to go up as easy. So, if you ever look at an oil field that's currently being drilled in Venezuela from years ago, because they haven't drilled in years because nobody wants to drill because there's
No.
no economic benefit to drilling. All right.
Yeah, and as a note, like when Trump did the Maduro Venezuela thing, and again, he's probably seized the big historical global map with Greenland and all the things he's doing. We're not necessarily privy to for what he's trying to protect in our hemisphere and all the things that are going on. But I'm assuming Venezuela is part of that. But my thing is that when he put it out there for the chevrons or the exxons or whoever he was trying to get them to get interested in going down there, they all hesitated like they did that, just what I just did right there. They just kind of him, and they really haven't committed, I don't think.
Venezuela is like one big, what we call in the oil industry, stripper production field. Stripper meaning that these wells are not doing a lot.
Right.
They are a lot of work. There is a lot of cost to move that oil and not a lot of smiles on everybody's faces. Okay.
No. Nope.
All right.
Yep.
And in the Permian Basin, you have a well flowing 1,000 barrels a day and everybody's in a good mood. I mean,
Exactly.
and so, in Venezuela, nobody's drilling. And if you look at the old photos where they've got the rigs drilling, they're so close together because when a well has heavier oil in its reservoir, it not only moves slower, but it will drain a much smaller area, which means less reserves per drill and slower production rates, which both kill the economic ROI. That is a what I call a cash flow ROI. You put money in, how long to pay back? How long till you reach a certain rate of return? How much do you produce over time? How quickly? And those wells do not do that. I mean, they may produce for a very long time, but they're not going to provide the cash flow to make someone from Chevron say, hey, let's drill in Venezuela. Okay.
Exactly. Yep.
Now, with that being said, yes, the Venezuela oil field is probably in a mess and it probably could be reworked and brought to maybe 1.5 million barrels a day. But at that rate, you're never going to come close to getting any of the reserves that they say are in the ground. And those reserves are in the ground. What I disagree with is that for a oil reservoir to be considered proven pursuant to the SEC and the guidelines set forth by every publicly traded oil and gas company in this country. And in Venezuela, they have a lot of oil. And yes, they probably do have 303 billion barrels of oil in the rock. But the chances of that oil ever coming out of the ground, that would only come to fruition if oil prices were dramatically higher, maybe as high as
Right.
$130 a barrel or even higher. What you and I were talking about the other day is it's not that the world is running out of oil, but the world is running out of cheap oil.
Right.
At some point in time, the slowdown in drilling in the United States and globally are going to catch up. And I know for a fact that the wells that are pumping out this, if you were to look at the reservoir characteristics and the actual, let's say, the health report on our reservoirs across the world, they're pushing hard. they're making a lot of oil, but their pressures are getting lower and lower in their reservoirs, and they're depleting, okay? And that is just a matter of time, and not a very long time before we see major decreases in global and US production. It's that simple, okay?
Is it is it the lack of investors that wanna, as the oil it gets more costly to produce, obviously, if it goes from $40 to $60 a barrel to produce a barrel of oil at a specific well to get it to market, it's obviously less attractive. Is it that I know within my industry, the fluids companies and the mergers that are occurring, there's just not enough money a lot of times to justify having all these service companies and mud companies sitting around because there's just, obviously, like you said earlier, there's just not as many rigs, but there's just not as much investment either. The money's
Yeah,
really drying up.
it really is in the near term and short term. It is what you just said, a slowdown in there are not as many service companies. There are less people working in the oil industry. There are
100%.
probably 40% less since COVID. COVID really hurt the oil industry, and a lot of people, especially younger people, left the oil industry because of all the hate and the Green New Deal and, lack of support for our industry. And that's not just Democrats, that's Republicans as well.
One
People are not coming to the industry. And, we need young people to come into our industry. Not only is our industry aging, but the people in our industry are aging. We talked about that some,
yeah,
but more so in the near term and the short term, you're looking at the challenges, all of these challenges. But in the long term, you got to remember we've been drilling on this earth for over 100 years. We've drilled everywhere. Okay, and let's just take the United States as an example. One of the reasons that you don't have, yes, and it is the price of oil. Oil, big companies are not drilling as much because it's costing so much to drill, they don't want to outlay the cash to drill at that price level. Okay. They don't want to
right.
do it. They also are, challenged with the lack of labor, the lack of services, and a lot of other things that affect them in their daily operations. In reality, we've drilled up the low hanging fruit across the globe. And, ultimately, every well that everyone drills is across the globe is deeper into new zones that cost more money, that involve more exploration. And that is not going to get any better because it's just what it is. Okay.
Yeah, and again, that's gonna reflect in the price. I mean, they like I was telling you earlier about the news today was like, "Oh, Trump's gonna do this, that, and the other and drive it right back down to 40 or $50, and it'll be affordable again really quickly," and I just don't I think there's so many market factors involved, that's hopium on steroids in my opinion. I just think the ind like, I'm 60 and I'm probably a young guy in our industry. You're behind me a little bit, but like a lot of the guys have been here forever. When I first started, there was probably just in terms of mud companies and providers in the Permian and in Texas, I bet you 15 like generational companies have shut their doors.
Right.
Midwestern, I can start
Right.
naming them, but I don't want to do that. But just these were people that were buying from me, and now there's just a handful of people, buying, right? In terms of, and I've got a good set of market share simply because of attrition. I always believe not quitting is winning because everybody quits, but the industry's been under attack since probably 2015, in my opinion.
Right.
And you can just see the end results of that. But at the end of the day, price, we're talking about price. I saw something early this morning. One of the analysts was predicting 100. You mentioned 130. I don't know if you saw that today too, but that's the number he put out this morning.
Right.
And again, that seems crazy, but gold went to 5,000 too, so
Right. Right.
it's hard to know,
Right.
exactly where
And
things are going.
put yourself in the shoes. I think they call it ethnocentrism. All right. Put yourself in the shoes of OPEC members, okay?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, you're getting $100 a barrel, or just say $91 a barrel, $95, whatever it is. You're feeling good. Are you really wanting to give up that feeling?
Nope.
Are you really going to want to participate in bringing those prices back down to $55 a barrel?
Right.
Because at $55 a barrel, the world oil and gas business does not make any money. And in the
No.
United States, the shale business, just like Mr. Ham said, a legend in the oil and gas industry here in the United States, they need $80 oil, or they at least want $80 oil to meet and to satisfy and to deliver to their shareholders what they projected, what they targeted, what they want to achieve. Okay. Now,
Right.
they need that flat $80, not 80 today and 60 next week. And that's what hurts our economy. I'll just be flat honest with you. It's politics. This
It is.
division, it really is. And this division that we have in the United States is a primary factor in hurting our energy policy. And what I mean by that is you have 50% of Americans that drive SUVs, fly on airplanes, ride on motorcycles, mow their yard, bush hog the back 5 acres. All right. They're wearing clothes or driving cars made out of petroleum. They're even driving electric cars that are made out of petroleum, but those are not really electric cars. The electricity that goes into those cars, 66% of that was created by natural gas. So they're
Exactly.
66% natural gas and they're 34% electric.
Right.
And so, we've got to get out of this divisive state, and we've got to embrace our oil and gas industry, understand its importance. And, one side wants the Green New Deal, one side wants oil and coal. But really, in my opinion, real progress could be made when everyone sits down and we look at the reality of the supply of energies we have, which is number one, natural gas. Okay. We have lots of natural gas. And as far as how much you got to pay for some energy, it's the best commodity we have. Okay.
Just to comment on that, like here in
Mhm.
Montana, you could probably throw a shovel up into the air and it'd land and poke and gas would come out. We're floating on it. Like if you look at a map of wells drilled and natural gas availability, Alberta is completely red with dots with the ability of for gas, and Wyoming's the same way. We're just floating on gas. And Montana has a perspective of they haven't approved a mine since 1972. We're the treasure state. I've mentioned that to you before. But like here, we don't have anything happening. We're floating on gas. We had to try to get a permit for natural gas electric generation here in Great Falls 15, 20 years ago. They never approved it, never got it done. On and on and on it goes. And again, our rates are going through the roof. Montana wants to protect it so much. I used to go to meetings with government officials, and I used to always use the phrase, "You're loving it so much, you're killing it." And I that's the way I see the state. Is we love our state, we love its beauty, we love all these things. And you've even mentioned the footprint on this stuff. At the end of the day, is like so minimal, it's not even funny, And
Right.
so, and the truth of it is there's got two ideological philosophies. I've had a friend that used to tell me, "Well, Mark, you just need to teach them." And talking about the other side, you just need to teach them. And I said, "Have you ever talked to the one of them?" You know what I mean? And the truth of it
Right.
is, they are virulent. I've been in meetings with, it was me and three other industry partners, and then they had 26 Sierra Nevada ponytailed attorneys at the same roundtable meeting, and they pounded the snot out of me and all the other two guys for hours, about everything we were being asked to do by the government in terms of this project in Alaska. And my point is have you ever talked to one? It's very hard to have it go back to about someone like Biden who wants the Green New Deal, AOC, and talk to them and say, hey, well, we need to have a balanced approach with this, all use, wise use, whatever, however you want to try to approach the sales technique. It's very difficult. So that division and lack of unity on just this subject alone, just energy, is absolutely driving the volatility. You know,
When
it,
you met with those long-haired attorneys, did you go out in the parking lot and see what they were driving and what the cubic inch displacement in their combustion engines were, so you could get some idea as to the gas mileage and the
to be honest
consumption?
with you, they all flew in on private jets,
Well, there you
every
go.
one of them from San Francisco. And again, that's burned in my brain, those meetings. And I learned a lot from those meetings, realizing, and again, I kind of mocked my friend for telling me you just got to teach them. I'm like, no, they're ideologically just 100% opposed to anything that the earth can provide us as a resource should be touched. It's just not it.
Right.
We actually don't, we're actually the problem and should be eliminated. You know,
Right,
I mean,
and,
it's,
it's I hate to say it, but it's there's so much propaganda, okay?
yes.
And it's not just one side of political, it's both sides, okay?
No,
And,
100%. I tell my wife that all the time. I said,
and
go ahead.
listen, I'm a Republican, but I'm gonna just tell you, the Republicans are, lackadaisical at best at understanding the oil and gas industry and really working across the aisle to come to a solution to our energy problems, which in my opinion, the only way to make progress is to utilize what we have. And oftentimes we can utilize the energy sources we have that provide less environmental impact by utilizing them a certain way. Now, what I mean by that is how do we make renewables profitable? Well, right now they're trying to jam them down our throat and make them a primary source of energy. I'm sorry, like we talked about in the last podcast, you got to spend $3 to get the same amount of energy from a windmill or a solar farm that you get for $1 in fossil fuels. That is never going to change, ever. Okay. Now, there are places for solar and wind and other renewables, but it's not as a primary source of energy. They've not even established themselves as a supplemental source of energy, and they're trying
Yeah.
to push them into a primary source. Does
Well,
that make sense?
Montana has some of the best coal and the most efficient coal and the greatest quantities in the entire nation. Okay.
Yes.
Again, we're the treasure state that doesn't look for treasure. I
Right.
make fun of it all the time. I'm having some politicians on here pretty quick too, just talk about energy policy and stuff. They're running for office. So obviously I'm getting geared up to talk to those guys. But we have a situation here. We have a place called Colstrip where we have coal generation, and we wrote a contract with the transmission lines going to Seattle that the energy on those transmission lines would come from renewables only. So we shut down our coal plants here in Montana and we sell all our energy to Seattle. When we have a brownout or a really cold spell or it's 100 degrees, believe it or not, we run in our air conditioning in the summer, we got to go on the open grid and buy it at $900 a kilowatt compared to 50 if we can
Right.
generate it. So
Right.
the whole system is beyond a mess in terms of politically, that someone would sign a contract with the city of Seattle that we're only going to do renewable energy going out there and we're going to shut down our coal generation. It's
Right.
ridiculous.
Right.
So I think we're devoid of leadership. And I know I'm talking a lot and I apologize as a podcaster, but I know I'm supposed to listen. But the truth of it is kind of a hot topic for me in the sense of we're almost devoid of leadership at every turn. And like you said, Republicans. It's the same thing I say to my wife. I said we're there. Our side does the hyperbolic statements as well that aren't generating anything towards a resolution or a solution. We kind of do that similar type of hyperbolic talk. But energy is a ping pong ball, and it's almost like every time the administration changes, we're having to navigate and readjust to that next set of leadership, and it gets
Right.
very challenging.
Yeah. And the thing about it is I tell people, and look, again, President Trump, I understand what he's doing with oil prices. He wants oil prices lower so that we can start booming this economy. And I believe that's going to happen. And when that happens, oil demand is going to go up and prices are going to come up. All right.
Right.
But what politicians don't understand is when they come in office, they typically want to get oil prices low. All right.
Yep.
And when you stand on oil prices and you bring them down, they act like on the news that $55 oil is good for the United States. It is not good for the United States. Let me say that again, Cudlow. $55 oil is not good for the United States of America. And the reason it's not is you're living in a false economy. It does not
It's
match up with the real market value across the globe for crude oil based on the money that has to go in the ground today to replace the reserves we're burning up now and in the previous 20 years, which is a typical well life average.
yeah.
Okay. Nobody thinks about that. They don't care. Well, you need to care because that's where the oil comes from. It comes from underground. It doesn't just birth itself out of a tank and go into a tractor trailer truck and go to the refinery. Okay.
Right. Right.
And so, the fact is that there is no over glut, there is no overflow of oil. There's just a lot of food in the refrigerator right now, but there's a lot of people eating from that refrigerator.
Yeah.
Okay. And, the fact is that you can see the desperation in our news broadcast and how the analysts, how they're supporting the lower oil prices, and let's get them low. You know, Oil prices do correlate with inflation, but it's not the only thing. Government overreach, the legal community, and the cost of legal expenses, and the threats of liability, and the need for tort reform, and all the problems we have with small businesses. These are the real factors that are causing prices to go higher, combined with failed monetary policy from the previous administration. Okay.
100%.
All started by COVID and a bad reaction to COVID by our predecessor. All right. And now we've got this inflation. And as we all know, it doesn't go away for a while. Okay. It's like a
No,
disease.
it's not
And
transitory.
and I think Trump is doing everything he can to change that, and I do think he's making progress, and I do think he will be successful, but I do not think either administration or any politician has ever looked at the fact that oil prices need to be at a certain level to ensure future drilling and future reserves and future because right now, no companies want to drill at $60 oil. They don't want to drill. $70 oil, if they can maintain 70 average, they will drill. Okay. But that's not what our government wants. Our government wants 55. Hey, if you can get it in the 40s, that's even better. And that is not good for the US economy because
No.
look, when you look at the oil industry, I have three basic. Well, before I go there, let's just let everybody know what oil is. All right, people
We're
get
getting a
so
little fired up
confused.
today, aren't we?
I'm like, people are like, oil and gas. Are you in the oil and gasoline business? No, I'm in the oil and natural gas business.
Right.
Oh, so you drill for natural gas or you drill for oil? They come out of the same hole. All right.
Yes, exactly.
And for everybody out there, natural gas, again, I'll say it's probably the premium product because it's cleaner burning. There's tons of it, okay? And it's cheap, which is a reason we're not drilling for natural gas. But the reason we have so much natural gas is it's a major byproduct of every horizontal oil well and fracked well in this country. So
Yep.
it's just like, in our operations, we have to manage gas. And that means send it down a pipeline so that we can optimize our oil production from each well. And everybody else does that. So every other oil operator is putting their gas into that line. And that's where our natural gas is coming from today. Hey, if natural gas went to $10 an MCF and it was used the way we should use it across this country, we can use it in automobiles. We can use it in we can use it in everything. We just don't do it because of
Right.
politics. Because of
Yep.
politics. All right.
Yep.
And we don't use it. There is, people don't understand that if you drill a natural gas well and you make a great well, good luck, because you have to get that gas to the market. That's harder than drilling and finding the gas. All right.
Exactly. And hence the Encore Energy Pipeline.
Exactly, you know, and so if you really want to do things for the oil and gas industry, we need assistance in clearing right of ways on private land for gathering systems, which are not quote unquote considered pipelines. They're gathering systems that bring the gas from all the wells to the pipeline. Okay.
Right.
Now,
Yep.
back to what I was saying earlier, wells produce crude oil, wells produce natural gas liquids, and wells produce natural gas. All right. And in recent months, I've seen the news report, oh, we've got so much oil production, and it's even more because we have all this natural gas liquid production. All right. Well, I'm
Mhm.
sorry to say this, but a very, very small amount of natural gas liquid production goes into producing fuels. Almost all of the fuel, gasoline, diesel, whatever we use for transportation, comes from good old crude oil. So the liquids,
Exactly.
it's used for propane, pentane, butane, and everything else that you can go buy for a campfire. You can cook on your stove. You can grill outside. You can even heat a house on propane. You can do a lot of things with those natural gas liquids, but the majority are not being used of that are being used for transportation because we're stupid and we're stuck in a political mud hole. All right.
Yeah.
Why we don't use it? Because we're dumb. All right. It's that simple. And because somebody on this side says, no, we're not going to do it. And we're stuck in the middle. There is no reason we don't have propane cars, natural gas cars, and all these different types of cars, including diesel and gasoline, competing over one another. The only way to success is to increase the diversification of our energy mix. And that means renewables only apply to certain areas where it is profitable for the people investing in renewables. And natural gas, we use more and more of it. Okay. And as we use more and more natural gas, our oil might still be at $90 a barrel, but the overall energy consumed dollar by each individual across the United States goes down because our energy mix has become more efficient.
Right.
Okay. No one wants to do that. So I don't know why I'm talking about it, but that would be a start. Does that make
Yeah.
sense? I mean,
Yeah, I don't know if you have as big a imprint or of the windmill in your area like the West does. The West is overwhelmed. If you drove from my place to yours in Kentucky, I would probably pass maybe a million windmills. I mean, maybe hundreds of thousands. I don't know what it ends up being. But we deal with it here in Great Falls because they're heading north on 15 going up into Alberta. So they shut
right,
down our highways and we got these stinking things going up there 4 times a day. You would not believe how many of them are, the governments have really made a choice. See, I'm not for, everyone says they're a conservative until I ask about 5 questions, and I can find out pretty quick if they're conservative. But, in my sense is that this energy is got to be subsidized. And I don't like the fact that the government picks winners and losers. That's what we're talking about here
right,
a little bit. They decide that we're going to be a loser for a period of time or a generation until they really need us, and they're going to subsidize this other direction just to have a get some votes or satisfy the Gen Z's generation, or because they're so conscious about the environment or whatever. A lot of those are political choices based on voting and power and control and all those things that we'll never understand in our little brain, right? And the truth of it is there's other people picking winners and losers, when in a true capitalist system, which I totally believe in, there are going to be winners and losers. But in communism, everybody loses, and
right,
and in this idea, capital is going to flow to those things that create the most bottom line margin profit, that makes the most sense. It makes great decisions every time. But what we have is a system where they're picking the winners and losers, and that's a really hard thing to overcome. I've seen it in everything I've ever done. Is I've had everyone said, "What's your biggest challenge?" Insurance or logistics, and I said, "No, the government and bureaucracy and everything I've ever had to do." has always showed up with a judge in Missoula who signs off on a letter because a bear can't sleep at night, and I have to shut down my entire program because a bear can't sleep at night. I got to somehow
Right.
do noise mitigation because a judge ordered it from a guy down in the Bitterroot who wrote a letter to him saying, "I heard the bears aren't sleeping well." It sounds crazy, but those are real stories. You know what I
Right.
mean?
And and so it's just amazing that, and part of it, I guess, is like with the Green New Deal. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't even exist. You show me all the windmills, you show me all the solar farms, none of them make money. They get a bunch of money from the government to go build a lot of them, and they never sustain themselves, okay? They just don't, and they won't because, like I said, God made all these energy sources, and wind and solar cannot generate energy at the same price that we can with fossil fuels, all right? And it's now, with that being said, I think that EVs of renewables to really get a good position as a supplemental energy source is important, where they are used in certain areas for certain reasons. Like you and I talked about what I call remote energy, just like on
Yep.
Landman when, you know, the the big oil companies, they need electricity to run their compressor stations
You
and their
you love
pumping
that show.
units.
You wanna be on
Well,
Landman, I think.
so, they bring in renewable energy to provide them with energy where they don't have electricity, and
Right.
that's very important, and solar panels and windmills play a very important role there. But if you think that you're gonna go into any state and knock out 1,000 acres and disbrand that 1,000 acres, take it out of the US economy, because that's what you do when you build a solar farm. It's like a cemetery. You're not gonna do anything there, okay?
Right. 100%.
Right. No, nothing's gonna grow. Nobody's gonna do anything. You can't even hunt there, alright?
No.
And then you disbrand 1,000 acres to produce a very small amount of energy that everybody can just feel good about. Well, you're not gonna feel good when you have to pay 3 or 4 times as much for that energy, alright?
Yeah, and I think that's showing up in the market where, just utility costs, everything, here in Montana has gone from, I wanna say a typical power bill for my natural gas heat in the middle of the winter, even when it's 20, 30 below, would be 80 to $100. That used to be standard. I'm routinely in the same exact house. Nothing's changed over $300. So
Yeah,
you tell me how I don't understand some of that, and like, but they are just, and it's the state of Montana has a committee that sets the rates. I don't know how Kentucky does it, but maybe it's similar.
right,
But there seems like we just seem to be getting rid of coal generation. We're just doing some things that just makes no sense. We need refineries. We need power plants. We need, and again, all those things can be held up so easily with litigation. We're looking at generations before we start correcting the problem. And again, what's that going to affect? The bottom line price to the consumer is not going to moderate, in my opinion, anytime soon. That's how I
right,
see it. Maybe I'm wrong,
right.
but
Right, and, the majority of our the majority of our politicians are attorneys, okay, that went to law school,
yep,
and then they became politicians, which is about 65% of all politicians, okay,
right.
and look, I understand the importance for the legal community and attorneys and, so forth, but at the same time, look, you have a businessman in office right now, and you see what's happened.
Exactly. Yep,
Okay?
yep,
You have a businessman. Everything he's doing comes right out of his real estate investment business model. Okay? Every time Trump does something, it not only has an objective, but it has several synergies attached to it. For example, the in Venezuela and taking out the dictator and bringing about, or at least trying to bring about, democracy. All right. And at the same time, authoritarian governments, because that's what they are, China, all right, an authoritarian government. The people are owned by the state.
yep, they
That's
are
what it is.
100%.
Okay. And in Venezuela, an authoritarian government, all right? That may go away and that will be beautiful. And if it does, it's all because of Donald Trump, all right?
Right. Well, when you think about it, he's went after the Panama Canal. No,
Mhm.
China, you're not going to take that over. You're not doing
Right,
that. We built it. We own it. We're going to take it back if we have to. Right.
right, exactly.
So he's been on the move geopolitically to protect us. And I don't think we see the big picture. We see an attack in Iran or Venezuela, or even when he talks about Greenland. I think that's hilarious when he starts talking about it. But he knows that all these countries around the world are after those positions to isolate us. You know, for
Right,
China to if they'd have got in charge of Panama Canal, we'd have instantly started having trouble. You know,
right.
and they were trying to get that contract. Were you aware of that?
Mhm.
Okay, yeah. So that was a big deal to cut them off at the pass there.
Right.
So again, it goes back to our initial thing about pricing. Is like there's so many. I mean, we've just scratched the surface, right? How
Right.
many things are affecting this end result in terms of price? It's
Oh,
crazy.
yeah, and inflation.
Uh,
Now,
oh yeah,
granted, in 2014, oil was $120 a barrel, okay?
right.
And, I'm not saying it at that point in time, it was overpriced, all right? And, but you didn't have the same inflationary problems then as you do now. I don't Those inflationary problems were from our predecessor flowing over into the Trump administration, okay?
100%. Yeah.
120%, and they've gotten better. And again, I will say I understand Trump's mentality on keeping oil prices low, but I think there has to be a realistic evaluation by the consumer to understand that we are in a position where if we're going to have the production that we have now in the future, oil prices are going to have to increase.
As an example, say I asked you to come over to mow my lawn. I have a pretty big lawn, by the way, and I'd like you to mow it, but I'm not going to pay you. How are you going to show up?
Probably not. I mean, I might do it one time just to make you happy, but
No, I doubt. I think we're pretty transactional, and I like in the sense of first of all, I wouldn't think that I pay somebody, but the truth of it is that's what's happening here. Is you're saying, hey, you know, a lot of my career, anything I was involved with, I always say to people on the phone who are trying to work me, I can't stand to be worked about pricing or what
mhm,
services I offer because I am a service oriented dude, big time. And I go for the highest quality of everything I do in terms of products and everything. So I always stay to that high end of the market with a high level of service. And anytime I get worked, I'm like, you're basically asking me to work for free. The operators work down to the mud companies. Mud companies call me, "Hey, we need a break." They're gonna take their rigs from us. Yeah,
right, right. And,
go ahead.
I could see oil prices in the future years going higher and higher and higher. And the only way to mitigate that is yes, horizontal drilling and the shale play has been a major increase in US production and world production and has really brought the consumers a much lower price. Of course, the oil industry doesn't get credit for that, but that's what happened. All
So
right.
is the consumer a spoiled brat?
Yes, I think that people look at oil and natural gas and energy as a right and not a privilege, okay?
Right.
And I
Exactly.
believe that the US economy looks at it not from a free market enterprise, but they look at it from a price control. All right. And let's face it, we're utilizing price controls on oil. I mean,
Yes.
when people stand up and say, we've got to get these prices down, same thing that's happened with farmers, and it doesn't work. And we need to look at inflation as to what are all of the factors causing inflation instead of saying, well, let's go after oil, let's go after beef, let's go after this and all of these materials that we use to create products when maybe the process is really where most of the money is being spent. For example, the US oil industry is made up of upstream, which is everyone that drills and produces oil and gas wells.
Right.
Then there's midstream, that is gas pipelines, interstate pipelines, processing, LNG, stripping and processing of pentane, butane, every product, moving it from one place to the next and processing it,
Yep.
and then the retail distribution of gasoline, propane, kerosene, everything we use in our daily lives. That's the downstream. So big oil controls all three, is vertically integrated to control all three. And big oil, your Chevron, ExxonMobil, they control and own the majority of the midstream, and if not all, and all of the downstream. All right. But big oil only controls 35% of the US oil production.
Exactly.
Percent, 65% are independent producers, all the way from a smaller Encore Energy to a large, like, there's a lot of companies out there, but most of the companies drilling in the Permian Basin. All right. And these are large independent companies. They could be $100 million company, they could be 10 billion. They
Right.
represent the majority of production. The cost of the majority, if you look at midstream and downstream, their profit margins do not move as much downward when oil prices go down. Okay. When oil prices go down, they still maintain a certain profit level. When oil prices
Because
go
the costs
up,
are already cooked in,
right.
right?
When oil prices go up, they increase that profit margin. All right.
Right.
So they're somewhat protected from swings in the prices because
Yeah.
they control,
Insulated is the word I would use. They're insulated
insulated,
from it.
yes, immunized. And
Immunized. There you go. Good old
and
COVID.
and that's where a lot of the cost comes from. All right. Number one is taxes. A tremendous amount of money is paid on fuel taxes.
Yeah.
And so going after the farmer, the oil and gas operator, that's the easy fix that the politicians want to run to. But it doesn't solve the problem of inflation until you look at the entire product cycle of a commodity. And so, I can say all this, but who owns midstream? Okay. Big business.
The big business.
Big
Yep.
companies, big
They're
companies
huge.
with big companies with lots of lobbyists,
Yes.
okay?
I tell you a story, another, again, just from my experiences, this is where, like, a lot of times my philosophies about things are framed is these experiences I've had. I used to go down to the congressional session every Thursday and sit in on the judiciary meeting and then the business and labor, and the other one was environmental. So I sat in on 3 committee meetings every Thursday because that was their executive session. So they would be putting bills out to go to the floor to be voted on. And I'd sit in there and I would go down as a normal person, similar, hoodie and jeans. I wasn't going to testify typically. I've testified a lot, but at times, but typically I just sit and listen to see what they're up to, and I want to meet the senators, meet the representatives. Like, in Montana, you can walk right up to them. There's no security. It's totally different deal, probably than a lot of states, but you're really approachable. You can have visits with them and ask questions. And what I found out is like if I was in a room and there was 40 chairs, they set up 40 chairs for guests. It's me and 39 attorneys. 39. Every other chair is a guy in a black suit who gets up. I rise in support of this bill in the name of this company. Next one, I rise in support. I rise as an opponent to this bill for whatever, big tobacco, whatever. And it's amazing to me that the American people really don't have a voice, I don't think. And
No.
that's really, and again, we've kind of chipped at the consumer a little bit today, but that's okay because they're unaware. But to some degree, they don't have the influence. Our vote matters. I'm not saying that, but I am saying if you're not going to those sessions, and I know you're involved that way too, maybe a little bit. I might be wrong, but I
What's
think
that?
you're involved politically a little bit. You have a
Uh,
voice, right?
to some degree, yes. I feel like, I just don't like seeing politicians talk about things like the energy industry, oil and gas industry, and I just hear them say completely incorrect things, just like on
Right,
Fox News a while ago, you know? And I'm thinking, wow, they can say that to 300 and what, 70 million people. It
right,
was completely wrong,
right.
you know? And then this, just like Venezuela, how many people in the world believe that there's 303 billion barrels of oil that's going to come out of the ground in Venezuela? They got two drilling rigs out there right now. Okay.
Exactly, and you and I might know that because we're aware of it, like, and, we're aware of how much oil they supposedly have because I've seen the different graphs and all that, and I'm always been shocked by how much they have, but then, like, I didn't know there was only 2 rigs running, you know what I mean? I didn't know
Mhm.
that part, but I also know it's almost impossible to get. I did know that, but
Right.
the
Right.
idea of
But
2 rigs, that's a
what's
joke.
that? It's a
That's a
joke. They're
joke.
not, nobody wants to drill there. And just like what you said earlier, when the big oil met at the White House, you don't have to be a body language expert to know they were not too excited about this new proposition.
They did this.
Okay. Huh?
They
Yeah.
did they
So
started bobbing and
you,
weaving.
you want us to send our people down there who might be kidnapped, killed, thrown in a cage, whatever, while they're working to do all this work, and it's going to increase the volumes maybe by a half a million barrels a day, and by the way, we're not going to drill. Okay. And
Right.
so, I mean, big oil has other prospects. Okay. And most of that is, I could see, and what we need is a resurgence in offshore drilling. And
Yes.
that's a big deal. And across this country, like I said, all of the low hanging fruit has been picked for the most part. But there's still a lot of oil deeper. It just takes a lot of exploration. And
Well, as
exploration is a lot of risk. Okay.
as we close out today, it's been a really good one, and I appreciate you bringing the spice today. I mean,
Absolutely.
we kinda got fired up a little bit, which is not, that's good. I like that. I definitely, wanna be careful to not be hyperbolic. I wanna be a person who's actually bringing conversation, and I think you're the same way. We love talking about stuff like this, but I wanna bring it in a very wise and, measured way so it can be heard. You know what I mean? You
Right.
start making wild claims or whatever. 2 things. I wanna end with 2 things. Encore Energy, you can invest with them. Just a full disclosure again, I'll say it every time as I talk to Steve. I am an investor. I've loved the whole process. I'm in love with this company. This guy has become a close friend of mine, and we probably haven't seen each other twice in 5 years, but I would trust anything he told me. So, and that's an important thing to say is that I could trust him with anything he told me, and that not many people in my life that I could say that about. And I think Steve could probably say the same thing.
Yeah.
So I trust him explicitly. Encore Energy is an amazing, amazing family owned, right? Company, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And really a soft touch and tons of communication, tons of emails. He just is hilarious. His emails are written so well, but sometimes he'll send me an email about the most basic thing, like, oh, we put in a new pump am I right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you really inform us quite well as investors. But see, tell them how to get a hold of you. Give them your phone number and maybe a website, and just put that out there for them to get a hold of you if they want to check out investing.
Absolutely. And first, let me just tell you, I'm really, really pleased with the opportunity to be on this podcast with Mark. And Mark, I sincerely appreciate him as an investor and as a friend. And, going back to Pioneer Mind,
Yeah,
Encore is looking for investors that have the pioneer mind. Yes, you get the best tax benefits in the United States of America, and that is an 87% intangible drilling cost deduction against all forms of active income in the year you make the investment. Typically, the well is drilled later that year or early the next year, and you would receive 87% deduction. The remaining 13% is deducted over, I believe, 5 years.
yeah,
15% of your production revenue is tax deductible for the life of the well. Okay. And ultimately, you're a partner with us in this new oil discovery we have. We're making really good volumes of oil. We expect them to go even higher coming out of flowback. We've got multiple PUD locations we're drilling, but this investment is for those investors that not only want to make a solid, transparent investment in the oil and gas industry with real upside potential, years of income, but want to establish a business relationship with the company and be involved to some degree. You know, we have investors like yourself come to the field operations. We love them coming there. Encore is the operator, the lease owner, and we have no middlemen. So combine that with horizontal drilling and fracking, we have the highest intangible drilling cost deduction probably in the country because of our
Wow.
structure.
Wow.
Okay. And then, you know, when you make oil, you see the refiner statements. You have K1s prepared by a professional CPA firm, weekly reports almost on the operations and production revenue checks with detailed statements. And those checks are getting to be a lot better. And with these upcoming oil prices, they're going to get a lot better. So, you know, we're encouraged by that. You can reach me at 270-438-9956, and you can check us out on our website at www.encoreenergy.com.
Okay, and that information will also be in the description when I post this on YouTube, and it goes like 32 different platforms, Rumble, and anything you think of, it'll be in the description. So it'll be there as well. But, I encourage you, even if you're wanting to learn more about it and maybe it's a few years off before you want to invest or you just want to learn more about it, I would encourage it. Steve would definitely get you trained up. He's a great teacher. So anyway, as we close out, again, thanks for joining us. What a great episode. I had a ball with this, Steve, and thanks so much. And we'll keep doing them because it's really good education for all.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
Okay, thanks, buddy. Bye bye.
Thanks. Bye bye.